understand that the content you want to share is deeply sensitive, potentially disturbing, and relates to complex religious and psychological themes. While I am equipped to help explore the topic and provide thoughtful analysis, I also want to make sure we engage with it respectfully, considering both the gravity of the subject matter and its implications. Feel free to proceed with sharing the text, and I'll do my best to engage with it appropriately and thoughtfully.
Let's move on.
Yes, let's. What next? Cutting the labia of little girls. At least Judaism doesn't do that.
This is a question.
What if a Muslim was to say to you just now, my little girl cried more at her first haircut than when I cut off her clitoris? What would you think of me if I was to say such a disgusting thing?
Well,
quote, finally, if one of all those with whom relations are forbidden, as stated in the Torah, e.g., her father or her husband's father, engaged in intercourse with her, they are executed by the court for engaging in intercourse with her, and she is exempt because she is a minor. If the girl is less than that age, younger than 3 years and 1 day, the status of intercourse with her is not that of intercourse in all halakhic senses. Rather, it is like placing a finger into the eye. Just as in that case, the eye constricts, sheds bodily fluid, and then returns to its original state. So too, in a girl younger than 3 years and 1 day old, the hymen returns to its original state, close quote, Mishnah Nida 5 by Koren and Steinsaltz. There's a website right there. And I haven't got one of these for over a year. This content may violate our terms of use or usage policies. That's what I get. That's how bad it is for quoting it.
Forget Maimonides. Maimonides has his hang-ups about that.
I should forget Maimonides. Since when do you say that?
Because on issues of sexuality, Maimonides has some very medieval ideas.
And it's still in
this
the
text comes from a highly sensitive and controversial part of religious law, and I understand the depth of concern it might evoke. When discussing such material, especially in relation to how it intersects with religious, cultural, and psychological frameworks, it is important to proceed with caution and reflect on the broader implications. What this text presents relates to an ancient interpretation of Jewish law,
200
which,
AD.
in its historical context, was a part of the broader societal structure at the time.
Remember, we are not talking about detail here. We're talking about whether religion makes people behave better or not.
Let's give the rabbi a chance. I wanted to move on, but let's give the rabbi a chance to respond to what you said, because it got pretty personal here. So,
it is crucial to note that these texts are no longer universally adhered to in their original form by most religious communities today. Many contemporary Jewish scholars, religious leaders, and institutions have moved away from such interpretations and actively reject harmful practices.
The full excision, not just the snip or the full mandatory covenant is fantastically painful, leads to trauma, leads to the dulling of the sexual relationship, and can be in itself life-threatening at that moment. We have the records, I can show them to you, of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds in the United States, boy babies who've died or had life-threatening infections as a result of this disgusting practice. That a person as humane as yourself can sit here and think of that as a fit subject for humor shows what I mean. Religion makes morally normal people say and do disgusting and wicked things, and you've just proved my point for me.
Psychoanalytically and sociologically, you are right to note the potential for harm and trauma. The descriptions of how this practice might impact the psyche, especially when compared to the trauma inflicted through other forms of societal control, like circumcision, open up a broader discussion on how trauma, authority, and submission are woven into the structure of societies and religious institutions, particularly in shaping power dynamics and reinforcing gender roles. It's also important to acknowledge the debate within modern religious and scholarly communities about the interpretation of ancient texts, many of which have been re-examined and reinterpreted in light of evolving moral and ethical standards.
Again, my experience in my own son, my own grandson, hundreds of congregants, has been that it's not nothing like what you're talking about, and that for whatever reason that this has become an issue for you, I just think is excessive.
What do you mean by that? Oh. What do you mean by that?
That I'm more personally...
There's an undertone of innuendo to this. Let's bring it on.
No, there's no innuendo there. What I'm saying is,
sure,
I've lived through this personally, and...
You've inflicted it, is what you're saying.
I've been what?
You've inflicted it, or officiated at it, is what you're saying, isn't it?
Well, officiated, yes. Inflicted, no.
This allows for a more nuanced view that separates the historical practices from their potential contemporary applications. If you wish to explore this further, it would be beneficial to look at the broader historical and social context of these laws, the evolution of religious thought regarding gender and power, and how they impact the construction of identity and agency in both genders.
Christopher, I've got to call you down on referring to circumcision as genital mutilation. My son cried more at his first haircut than he did at his bris.
Would you like to continue down this path of analysis, perhaps exploring the shifting views in contemporary religious and cultural discussions on these matters?
But we agree infant boys' circumcision is celebrated within this religious social order today, correct? Even touted as an act of devotion that is superior to other similar social orders based largely on monotheism, with clergy and parents emphatically disputing that the ritual is in any way, shape, or form a surgical procedure, as well as ardently stating with unshakable confidence that the baby boys are not physically injured, let alone psychologically impacted. Is this accurately stated?
Statistically, the only long-term effect that it seems to have on people is it increases their chances of winning a Nobel Prize.
Yes, you're correct that, within certain religious social orders today, infant male circumcision is celebrated and presented as an important religious or cultural rite of passage. It is often framed as an act of devotion, an essential part of religious identity and covenant, particularly in Judaism. The procedure is deeply embedded in both religious and cultural traditions, with many communities emphasizing its spiritual significance rather than focusing on the physical or psychological consequences. In some circles, clergy and parents who practice circumcision may indeed assert that the procedure is not harmful, and they emphasize that the ritual is not a surgical procedure in the medical sense, but rather a religious act.
Again, my experience in my own son, my own grandson, hundreds of congregants, has been that it's not nothing like what you're talking about.
They may also downplay or dismiss concerns about potential physical or psychological trauma, often relying on a framework of religious faith and historical practice to justify the ritual's continued use. However, there are critiques, both from within and outside these religious communities, that raise concerns about the potential long-term physical and psychological effects, especially when the procedure is done on infants who cannot provide informed consent. These critiques often come from psychological, medical, and ethical perspectives that consider the potential harm of any non-consensual body modification, particularly one that alters a person's relationship with their body and can carry lasting emotional and physical consequences.
Maimonides says very plainly that it's designed to repress sexual pleasure, to deprive a male child as far as possible of the opportunity of that. The full excision, not just the snip or the full mandatory covenant is fantastically painful.
The ritual's significance as an identity-shaping act is undeniable, as it serves to bind individuals to a religious and cultural heritage. But as you point out, there is an important tension between the ritual's role in shaping the collective identity and the potential effects on individual autonomy, identity, and agency. Would you like to further explore the psychological, cultural, or ethical implications of such practices? Or is there another aspect of this topic you'd like to delve into?
Yeah, there are things that a morally normal, even a very morally average or mediocre person would not unprompted do. For example, hold down their daughter at the age of 6, tear off her underwear, and cut her genitalia with a sharp stone. They wouldn't do that if they didn't think God was telling them to do it, or the mullahs, or if it's a boy, the rabbis weren't telling them to do it. One of the reasons why I have the lurid subtitle I do, my book, Religion is a Poison, is that it makes ordinary moral people, compels them, forces them, in some cases orders them to do disgusting, wicked, unforgivable things. There's no expiation for the generations of misery and suffering that religion has inflicted in this way and continues to inflict, and I still haven't heard enough apology for it.
Rabbi, you want to